I'd like to welcome everyone to this Adobe for Education presentation. My name is Sean Gloomis. Sorry, even though it says Remy. I am subbing for him today. And today's live session is going to be with Walt Di Mantova from Liminal Futures. And the topic for today is the future is not what it used to be. And he's got a great presentation, and he'll go through and tell you all about the future here. A couple really quick things for those of you who are on and viewing today. You can always go full screen mode here to watch the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them down here, or you can also jump in and on the chat and talk live to us as well. And as Walt is doing his presentation, I will be watching for any questions and pass them along to him as well. And so to get started here real quickly, I will let Walt do his introductions, tell him a little bit about himself, and get right into the presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Walt.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Sean, for setting this up. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to some of our colleagues who are in the workforce and economic development world or in the education world in general. A little bit of background, I have been part of thinking about the transformation of education for a very long time. And during that time, I think one of the most important things I've really focused on is innovation and change. And I've had an opportunity to see a lot of innovation and change working with very large corporations from across the country. And my obsession is thinking about what we've learned in the past to help us better inform what we can do in the future. So I think the sort of things that we're talking about here are going to have an enormous impact of not only what we're going to do in the education world, but how the next generations will be impacted. And so that's something I've been involved with a long time, whether it's creating a center on innovation or working across California, and most recently developing this organization called Liminal Futures, which I'm the principal of, which focuses almost 100% of working on the prediction of what could happen based on the information about what's happened in the past or what's happening now. And I have a very interesting background, and part of that will be included in this presentation. And as Sean said, if you have any questions or you'd like to hear more, if you'd like to engage, please let him know, and I will do my best to have a dialogue. Even the word presentation makes me a little uncomfortable. So if there's anyone out there who'd like to enter into a discussion, that would be great. Because it'd be an opportunity to both be challenged and to learn. So with that said, why don't I just proceed? Um, as I said just a moment ago, I think that we right now have we're in a point where we need to change and reformulate and reframe how we think about the future as educators and as change agents, because we all know that change is happening. It is happening at an accelerated rate, and that acceleration is happening even more. So part of what I do as a professional futurist is look at that rate of acceleration and the little bits that are coming into our world and how they're changing more and more quickly. So when you hear about the word, when you hear the word futurist, I think this is what most people imagine I do, which is with the wonderful future-looking glasses and talking about robots and those sorts of things. And in essence, trying to do this to people, which is to blow their mind, which is to say, have you thought about this? Or do you realize this is happening? Well, yes, that's part of what I hope to do today, is to not even talk about the things that are going to happen in the distant future, but things that are happening in the future as of by this afternoon, which is quite astonishing. Part of what I do in always preparing is look through hundreds of emails. And it is really interesting to see, even within a 1 week period, the technological transformations or the economic transformations, all of the things that are wrapped around each other, the immediate impacts that are happening. So even though I'm in the role of a futurist, in so many ways, I'm in the role of an aware presentist, which means I'm paying attention. And the more we as educators pay attention, the more we as people who want to provide information, the more we should both be elated and a little bit afraid, which I think is both that wonderful opportunity to feel discomfort. So part of what I hope to do today, if I had an opportunity to meet with any of you face to face, part of what I'd like to do is increase your discomfort is what's happening in the future. Now, what's interesting to me, one of the things I've always been fascinated with, is retrofuturism, which is a fancy way of saying what do people in the past think about what the future could be like. So here is something that is recent, and that I want to, in just a moment, go back and see how much that aligned with what people in the past thought would happen. So this is just from February. Artificial intelligence, which I'm going to talk a lot about in the future, that once artificial intelligence is adopted by companies, which is going to happen increasingly, they're going to expect that their revenues are going to skyrocket and their costs are going to decrease very quickly. Okay, this is not pie in the sky. This is things that are happening right now. All right, so let's look at what the past thought about things would happen. So here we have a vision from the past. Obviously, we do not have postal carriers who have, in one way or another, learned how to levitate. It's interesting, of course, we have the happy woman there on the left who is at home with her apron. And this is an image, I believe, from, yeah, it is from the mid-50s. So the assumption is, of course, that women will always be wearing aprons, no matter what they do. So here we have a vision of the future back then that, oh, yes, we will have rocket mailmen. Well, actually, we are not having rocket mailmen. We will quickly have delivery drones of every type. So this is a little bit different. It's a pretty close approximation, but it's still assuming that in one way or another, there's a human being involved. Well, let's look at this. Again, from the 1950s, here is somebody predicting one way or another, we're going to have this miraculous one world job market. And obviously, that has happened. LinkedIn is a one world job market. There are plenty of sites now around the world to have access to job opportunities. And in fact, this is the future of the gig economy. We'll talk about that later, of people being able to work anywhere around the world in any way they choose. So this was pretty darn close to what we have now. I always think that this is one of the funniest ones because this seemed so impossible, and outrageous change 50 years ago. This is fascinating because the assumption about push button education was considered to be way out in the future, far beyond things like the levitating postman. So here we have this idea that somehow in the distant future, we will have online education. And of course, once again, the continuity here is we have a female educator. So once again, either you have an apron on or you are pointing to a board as a woman teacher. So here we have obviously a reality that people assumed was farther out, and for us it's just now so normal. We don't even think about it. And as I move through here, I think this is increasingly fascinating because in the distant future, according to these retrofuturists, here we have electronic instruments aided every step of medical practice. So not that long ago, people were thinking that this was on the farthest end of what you would expect. This is from the early part of the 1960s. So it's not that far long ago where people thought this was outrageous. And then finally, by 2016, which obviously was just last year, we will have our intelligence and intellect increased by drugs. I'm not so sure that it was our intellect was increased by drugs, but in one way or another, it certainly impacted that. And in fact, if you look at what's happening in pharmaceuticals right now, yes, there is a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of research being done to actually show that our intellect, quote unquote, can be improved through drugs, including having your brain rewired and improved through pharmaceuticals and chemicals. So you can see there's this trajectory of what the past thought about the future. Part of what I'd like to do today is carry that on to make you think that what we are going to be seeing in the distant future is now happening today. So let's go on. Obviously, part of this mixed in is how do you get to be successful in the world? How has that changed? Because this is about, this is at the core of what education is all about. So being a typical Italian-American family in New York City, this was the view of how you became successful. So this was the retrofuturism in a way from 1976. So my family thought it was actually a fairly simple equation. You go to school, you get a career of some type, and that leads to you making piles of money. That's a fairly simple career pathway. Now, as I was older, and as many of my friends and fellow students, it became a little bit more sophisticated. So here were your options. You could become a professional, which meant you could go into medicine and become a doctor or a dentist, or even better than that, a specialist. So you could become somebody like a plastic surgeon, or you went into business. And in one way or another, business was connected to a lawyer, which was the pinnacle of business. Not a lot of sophistication. But if you look underneath professional, there is the dreaded STFBO, which in our parlance was something to fall back on. So if you couldn't go through this pathway, what we would normally consider something like career technical education or vocational education, that was the something to fall back on. So if you couldn't become a doctor, you could learn how to fix cars, or become a plumber, or construction, or a teacher. I remember that was particularly important for women, my sisters. If you couldn't do any of these things, the only other option you had was something to fall back on. So in my parents' view, I was a failure. I didn't follow the normal professional career option. What I did was follow something like this. When I was in high school, I learned how to braze. I went through all of the vocational programs. I learned how to weld. I learned how to cast metal and take engines apart, build things out of wood, all of those sorts of skills that in many ways students do not get in high school now, for certainty. Well, if you look here, my interest up on the upper left-hand corner, I was interested in welding and that sort of thing, which got me interested in physics. And when I decided I really wasn't interested in physics because I wasn't smart enough, I started to branch out. So I got interested in things like social psychology. I got interested in perception as I left physics. I decided to make some really obviously well thought out career choices. So I moved away from things like the opportunity to work in solid state engineering to build computer chips, which I thought was a technology that couldn't go anywhere. And I decided to major in anthropology, which is essentially, applied unemployment studies. And you can see as I moved through a multiplicity of jobs. The green hours are those in which I made money. So I've made money through everything from researching the morphology of baboon jaws to working in marketing to working as an early childhood educator. I did, excuse me, training around consulting and innovation, eventually moved from marketing to workforce development to providing training programs, which then took me back to this long list across the bottom of organizations that I've worked with. Either the Community College Chancellor's Office, where I was a dean for 18 months, to my own organization, Liminal Futures, to on the right as you move along, EdgeMakers, which is the best innovation company in the world, where I'm a strategic advisor, and so on and so on. What I think this is a message about is there's many, many routes for a career. Is this in any way really a career to provide employment? What we're looking at here right now is not the abnormal. In my mind, what we're looking at here is the new normal. And the more we move away from the idea that in the future we're going to have linear careers, we are going to have to look at things like net careers. So this is what we think about what currently, in many ways, when we talk about careers, which is these nice long straight lines. So somewhere along the way here, a student decides they will be a fill in the blank. And they enter in, and hopefully what we have is somebody who follows through on a very linear career path. And anything that diverges from that is considered less. Now, I don't know if anybody listening has had an opportunity to go to Bangkok or Mumbai or Western Venezuela or Beijing or any number of other countries. This is not traffic that you see. This is what you see. And what I would argue in the future is this is antiquated, this is inefficient, and in many ways, this is dangerous because to survive in a world that looks like this, you can't have a linear career. The future is not following lines. The future is one of constant adjustment. So here, if you are trying to move across this space and have a single way to go, through that, you obviously will be unsuccessful. You'll take other people out along the way. But the point is, you're going to have to continually readjust where you think that you're going. The simple complexity of technology and economic change, economic disparity, all of the things that we know are happening in the world right now are going to require you to have a shift in how you think about your career. It's going to be more and more like this in the future, less like this, more like this, and in fact, actually more like this. And that obviously for all of us who are educators, but even more importantly for our students and our eventual students and so on, we're going to have to deal with complexity like this. That is a different skill set. That's a different attitude about the world. That's a reframing about how we think about careers and our future lives. So the future is one not only of increasing need to be flexible, it is for an increasing need to almost reach the end of our cognitive ability to understand where we're going. So that is a true challenge. That is a different kind of mindset. And that is part of what I would like to emphasize today, is that not only are we seeing technological change, we're going to have to see fundamental changes in how we think about the future and how we are successful in it. So here are some of the disruptions that are going to help shape how we think, how we work together, how we live on this planet. Obviously, the one that I'm going to speak about mostly today is technological change because it is the most common, it is ubiquitous, and it's having the greatest impact. But there are other things that we're going to talk about. Things like the on-demand economy. I'm a member of the on-demand economy. Self-determined learning. The deinstitutionalization of learning. What do we mean going forward about even the concept of a workforce, given that we have that enormous career complexity that I just spoke about a minute ago? What career pathways which has become one of the terms of so common use in education. It's morphing into guided pathways and so on. But can we really continue with any kind of a concept of career pathways given all this complexity? And finally, the importance of friction. And I will talk a little bit more about that. But the areas of most interest for us in occupations and economies and technologies are where all of those things rub up against each other, whether it's different sectors in the economy, whether it's different kinds of political groups, whatever it may be, hybrid technology, hybrid jobs, hybrid organizations. That's more and more what's going to define what we do in the future. So let me go with the first technological change. Either you will tell a computer what to do, or it will tell you what to do. So here's Kevin Kelly. For those of you who do not know Kevin Kelly, he was the first person to be offered a job on the internet and the first person to accept a job on the internet. He was one of the pioneers, he's still alive, but he was one of the pioneers in the use of online communication. He helped found the Whole Earth catalog. He helped found Wired magazine. And he's been a very, very influential thinker about the impact of technology. And he said something recently that still rings in my mind. He said it takes between 5 and 8 years for technology to be civilized. And I think he meant that in two ways. One is literally, it is in some sense when it comes in, the kind of technological advances we're talking about, they are not civilized, they are wild. We're not exactly sure how and when they could be used. All we need to see is taking a particular type of technology and it being pulled apart and used in different ways, or thinking behind that technology, and all you need to do is look at how hackers think. So in some ways, I think he meant the word civilized to literally mean we need to take the technology and control it. But he meant it in a second way, in the sense that we need to civilize it, which is how do we best absorb it into our thinking, our political action, our economic action. In other words, he argues, and I think this is a very sophisticated argument, that we cannot just assume that technology comes in like a rock and lands on us. We actually have an opportunity over time to morph technology, to find ways to best use it. It is not always that technology drives us. In many ways, we have responsibility for better determining how we can direct and use that technology to the best way. So it is our role, in a sense, as educators, no matter where we are now technology civilizers, that we need to take and shape and direct these technological innovations in ways that are going to help our students and ourselves now and going forward. Now, these are the sorts of things that Kevin Kelly says will be part of that civilizing of technology. The different kinds of skills that we have to to successfully negotiate this wave, this tsunami of technological innovation. It's interesting here that the way he puts this together is completely in verbs instead of in skills. So we have to be able to cognify. We have to be able to filter. And you can see remixing and tracking and questioning. All of these sorts of things we have to ask ourselves, are they part of the educational system and are they part of the career system that we, in one way or another, are promoting? Let's just ask ourselves by looking at the last category. How often do we honestly educate our students or prepare people for the workforce by teaching them how to better question? Well, we could easily argue that is something that is actually discouraged. Or you can see some of these parts like remixing as one of these skills. In many ways, those are things that are not taught in our educational system. But if we are to be better successful, we need to learn how to do these sorts of things, not just in an empty or vacuous or far away intellectual way, but actually hands-on, practical, demonstrable results. And that is a fascinating way to look at how we will be able to navigate technology. So what are we going to have to navigate? We've talked about this. These are some of the head exploding things that are happening. These are not loose predictions. These are the sorts of things that have been studied and have been tracked. So let's just look at artificial intelligence. By 2021, 6% of all entry-level jobs will be replaced by artificial intelligence. And then it goes on with 5% growth on top of that year after year after year. So what does that mean? That seems like, how does that impact me today? Well, if you call certain call centers, the artificial intelligence can recognize whether you're mad. It can recognize whether or not you need to speak to a higher level supervisor. So by your intonation and your tone and the loudness of your voice and the words that you use, if you are really mad, you don't speak to the entry level person, it moves to the higher level supervisor. Well, the next step is, if you're not particularly mad, most questions can be answered by that artificial intelligence. I just read a series of articles about people in entry level jobs, like in retail or in office management or any number of other areas. As part of their job, they are teaching their artificial intelligence replacement. So they are providing their years of expertise in those entry level jobs so that these jobs can be taken over 100% by an artificial intelligence. The next category I think is really, really important. And in fact, I don't even agree very much with the wording. We think that machine learning, automation essentially, is going to take over jobs, right? We're going to lose jobs. And actually, that's not the case. What's going to happen is we're not going to lose jobs, we're going to lose activity. So increasingly repetitive, boring, low value, low skilled activities are going to be replaced by automation. So it's not so much that we're going to see the collapse of jobs, we're going to see the collapse of certain portions of jobs. That's a complicated thing to think about if what you assume you're going to do is enter into an occupation. When you know that in one way or another, it really doesn't matter where you are on a wage scale, anything you do that is repetitive will be replaced. So this impacts people who work on the automation line, but the production line. This also impacts lawyers. Any kind of activity that a lawyer does that can be handled in a repetitive way by an artificial intelligence will do so. So normal paperwork will just be replaced by artificial intelligences, and so on. I mean, we can go into detail on each one of these sorts of things. It now takes between 6 months and 18 months for a machine learning automation machine to know how to do an activity. So in other words, we can take a automated welder, let it go, and in 6 months it knows how to weld as good as or better than a human welder. Difference is those robots have a minimum wage of $8 an hour. So think about that. You have an almost perfect replacement for a human welder that costs $8 an hour, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, in looking at all of this, we might think that there is a single answer, a single response, and it's going to take us some time to think through this. And in one way or another, we think these technological changes are going to push in one direction. Well, as a futurist, this is more as how I look at things, through a disruption map, that the complexity that we're seeing in these systems need to be understood not in a linear way, but in a systemic way. So we can have, this is one of my robot army on the lower right that they sit on my desk to remind me that one day or another I'll probably be irrelevant. But the idea is that this impact of technology will have impacts in all sorts of different ways to all these other areas that I'm talking about. So it's not just a one direction change, it is a systemic change, and that systemic change over time will also change. We might discover that that issues around career pathways, for example, will dramatically increase and then over time decrease. But the whole point is, it is not only getting more complex moving forward, how we think about it is going to have to get more complex. So if you're not afraid yet, you should be in one way or another. Here's trend two. Technology creates a gig economy, which means gig jobs. In other words, you don't you will not see in the future people who tend to be in one single job. And then perhaps I mean in saying the obvious, but between 30 and 40 and perhaps as much as 50% of people in this very complex world do not need to be in full-time careers doing the same thing. And what increasingly is valuable is in one sense being flexible and in the other sense being very specialized. It's that mix that is sometimes called the T knowledge, having broad knowledge in one area, but specific knowledge specialized in another. But the whole point is with this kind of acceleration, the categories that we think of as jobs are starting to peel apart. So this is this gig economy, sometimes called the contingent economy. You're hired, you finish a project, you move on, or non-employer economy, where you work for yourself, or an independent economy, the gig economy, the shared economy. In my own experience now in creating this company, I work only in shared co-working spaces. And I rely on pro bono relationships with others. So we have common questions, common issues. I trade X for Y. So we're in a different kind of world where part of my role is to learn how to navigate and take little bits of the shared economy to my benefit and then barter back to others for their benefit. And that's a fundamentally different way, I think, if we looked at our economy. So here we go. In the future, we'll all be adjuncts, meaning very simply, today, 30 to 40% of the people who are working are in the non-full-time independent work economy. It's fascinating. By 2020, it'll be 50% or more. Actually, if you look at people right now, older than 56, it's already up into the mid 60 percentile. So you're talking about right now, 65% of people older than 56 are already in the gig economy. My point here is this sort of thing is not just for 23